90%. That's how far Iran's missile attacks dropped after B-2 bombers hit its buried ballistic missile launchers with dozens of 2,000-pound bombs. That's not a claim from some anonymous social media account. That's the head of U.S. Central Command on the record in a public briefing, putting his own name behind that exact number. And right now, this same aircraft sits at the center of the single most dangerous, most contested threat hanging over this entire war. A mountain in central Iran that American bombs may not even be powerful enough to destroy, no matter how many get dropped on it. Let's separate everything that's actually been confirmed about the B-2's role in this war from everything that's still just a threat or pure speculation. Because the real, verified story here is dramatic enough already without anyone needing to exaggerate a single detail to make it land. Here's how this breakdown is sourced, because the B-2 attracts more speculation and more exaggerated claims than almost any other weapons platform in this war, precisely because so much about it stays classified by design. Everything here comes from CENTCOM's own public statements. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies, direct reporting on the March strikes, CBS News on-the-ground interviews with the actual B-2 crew and maintenance team who loaded the bombs, Time magazine's reporting citing the Institute for Science and International Security, the Washington Times coverage of Iran's own official denials, Gulf News reporting on recent bomber deployments, and Al Jazeera's video coverage of CENTCOM's public statements throughout this war. Where a claim is genuine speculation rather than confirmed fact, I'll say so clearly and explicitly, because that distinction matters enormously with a platform this shrouded in official secrecy. Let's start with where the B-2 actually entered this war, because it happened well before the specific strike this video is built around. Back in June of last year, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers took off from White Man Air Force Base in Missouri and flew directly toward Iran in a mission the Pentagon later revealed publicly was called Operation Midnight Hammer. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, told reporters at a Pentagon briefing that it was the largest B-2 operational strike in the entire history of the U.S. military, inflicting what he specifically called extremely severe damage and destruction on Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan simultaneously. The bombers carried 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, so-called bunker busters, the only weapon in any military's arsenal considered capable of reaching Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities. A separate group of B-2s flew west over the Pacific as decoys toward Guam, while the real strike package crossed the Atlantic and the Mediterranean over an 18-hour flight requiring multiple in-air refuelings. Chief Master Sergeant Frank Espinosa, who led the team that loaded those 14 bombs onto the aircraft, put it simply afterward. They all made it happen flawlessly. That mission is the reason the B-2 became a household name in coverage of this war, and it's the mission every subsequent B-2 story, including this one, gets measured against. Let's talk about what actually makes the B-2 such a uniquely capable platform for a mission like this, because understanding its technical profile explains why it keeps getting called back into service for exactly this kind of high-stakes operation rather than any other aircraft in the American arsenal. The B-2 Spirit is a flying wing design built specifically to minimize its radar signature, capable of penetrating some of the most heavily defended airspace on the planet without being detected by even sophisticated modern air defense systems. It can reach altitudes above 50,000 feet and fly roughly 6,000 nautical miles without refueling, a range that, combined with aerial refueling support, effectively means it can reach anywhere in the world directly from bases inside the continental United States. The decoy strategy used during Operation Midnight Hammer is worth understanding in more detail too, because it shows the kind of deception and operational security this platform's missions typically involve. While the real strike package of 7 B-2s flew east from Whiteman toward Iran, a separate group of B-2s flew west over the Pacific, generating open-source flight tracking data and news reports suggesting bombers were headed toward the American base in Guam instead. That deception works specifically because B-2 missions are so rare and so closely watched by open-source intelligence analysts around the world that even a partial misleading flight path can shift public and potentially adversary attention entirely away from the actual target. General Kane specifically described the operation as a highly classified mission, with very few people in Washington knowing the actual timing or nature of the plan, a level of operational secrecy that's genuinely unusual, even by the standards of major American military operations, reflecting just how much strategic weight was riding on Iran, not anticipating the strike before it happened. Now, let's get to the strike. This specific title is actually about because it happened months later and is a genuinely different operation with a different weapon entirely. On March 1st of this year, CENTCOM confirmed the U.S. Air Force had launched a new round of B-2 strikes against Iran this time, equipped not with the massive 3,000-pound bunker busters, but with 2,000-pound munitions targeting what CENTCOM specifically described as Iran's hardened ballistic missile facilities. That same day, President Trump separately announced that the United States had destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval vessels as part of the broader Operation Epic Fury, and that U.S. forces had also largely destroyed Iran's naval headquarters in the same coordinated stretch of operations. The Israeli Air Force, operating in close parallel, that same day separately claimed it had established full air superiority over Tehran, striking ballistic missile launchers, command and control sites, and air defense systems throughout the day, while also intercepting more than 50 Iranian drones since the broader operation had begun. Here is the number that actually earns this video its dramatic framing, and it's a real source number, not one invented purely for a catchy headline. The days after, that March 1st strike, the head of a U.S. Central Command stated publicly and directly that B-2 bombers had dropped dozens of 2,000-pound bombs on buried Iranian ballistic missile launchers, and that this specific campaign had contributed meaningfully to a 90 drop in Iranian missile attacks overall. 90. The same statement noted that an Iranian vessel described as a drone carrier ship was on fire after being hit separately. That's a legitimate sourced dramatic outcome, a specific weapons platform hitting a specific target category, producing a specific quoted collapse in the adversary's ability to keep launching missiles. You don't need to exaggerate anything to make that story land. It's already remarkable on its own terms. Let's talk about Fordow specifically because it was the single most important target in the original Midnight Hammer mission. And understanding why explains the entire logic behind the GBU-57's existence in the first place. Fordow sits buried deep inside a mountain outside the Iranian city of Qom, specifically constructed underground to survive exactly the kind of airstrikes a conventional adversary might attempt against it, a facility Iran built with survivability against bombing as a core design principle from the start. During the strike, a U.S. submarine separately launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Iran's Isfahan facility around 5 p.m. at Eastern Time, just before the B-2s themselves entered Iranian airspace, a coordinated multi-platform operation designed to hit multiple hardened nuclear sites in the same tightly compressed window, rather than relying on the B-2s alone to carry the entire mission. The bombers met up with U.S. fighter jets and support aircraft once over land in the Middle East, executing what Kane described as a complex, tightly timed maneuver, coordinating stealth bombers, fighter escorts, and cruise missile submarines into a single synchronized strike package against some of the most heavily defended and technically challenging targets in Iran's entire nuclear program. At least 400 people were reportedly killed across the broader Israeli bombing campaign running in parallel with these American strikes during the same general stretch of the war. According to reporting at the time, a reminder that the B-2's narrow role in targeting deeply buried nuclear infrastructure was happening alongside a much larger campaign involving Israeli forces, striking targets across the country simultaneously. The B-2's mission was narrow and specific by design, hit the handful of targets no other weapon could reach, while a much larger coalition effort handled everything else across a considerably wider target set. Let's spend a moment on what it actually took from a maintenance and loading standpoint to get 14 3,000-pound bombs onto those bombers, because it's a genuinely underappreciated piece of this story. Chief Master Sergeant Frank Espinoza and his team were specifically responsible for loading those 14 GBU-57s across the strike package, an enormous physical and logistical undertaking, given each bomb weighs roughly 15 tons. CBS News was given rare up-close access to the bombers during reporting on this mission, though much of the aircraft's actual design, the specific materials and shaping that give it its stealth capability, remains classified even now, months after the strike itself. Major General Jason Armagost of Global Strike Command, the officer who personally received the order from Trump to carry out the strikes, spoke about the stealth capability in general terms without revealing specifics, saying stealth matters and matters even more today than it did at the aircraft's inception, describing stealth as a combination of shape, materials, and tactics, protected specifically so its advantages don't accumulate to any other country studying it. Armagost also acknowledged directly that sending B-2s into Iranian airspace meant confronting the most advanced military adversary the platform had faced in this specific conflict. Up to that point, adding that his confidence remained very high once the mission crossed what he called that tripwire moment entering contested airspace for real. Just last week, multiple U.S. Air Force B-1 Lancer strategic bombers reportedly departed the United Kingdom, shortly after Trump directly threatened strikes on Pickaxe Mountain specifically. I want to flag something important here for accuracy. Those were B-1 Lancers, a different aircraft entirely from the B-2 Spirit, and the B-1 cannot carry the 3,000-pound GBU-57 bunker buster at all. Only the B-2 is certified for that weapon. Britain's new Prime Minister reportedly approved the use of UK bases for potential American strikes on Iran, and aerial refueling tankers launched separately from Romania, consistent with supporting bombers headed toward the Middle East. But the specific purpose of that particular movement remains publicly unconfirmed, and given that any real strike on Pickaxe Mountain's actual bunker complex would require the B-2 and its GBU-57 specifically, this B-1 deployment, whatever its purpose turns out to be, is not itself the aircraft that could deliver that kind of strike on its own, given that combination of facility potentially too deep for even the most powerful conventional weapon currently in the American arsenal, and a limited, slowly replenishing stockpile of that exact weapon. Some analysts assess any actual strike on Pickaxe Mountain would realistically aim to seal the facilities, entrances shut, rather than fully collapse or destroy the tunnels themselves. That's a meaningfully different and considerably less certain outcome than what happened at Fordo, where the GBU-57 achieved confirmed severe structural damage. Let's talk about the actual evidence of Iranian panic, because a title this dramatic deserves scrutiny of whether the underlying emotional claim holds up not just the strike numbers. Iran's own military spokesperson, Abolfazl Shikarchi, made a statement worth sitting with, directly warning American and Israeli officials, commanders and pilots, that Iran was tracking their movements, even beyond active conflict zones, and that public and recreational locations would no longer be considered safe for them. That's not the language of quiet confidence, that's an explicit public threat. Extending the war's reach into peacetime spaces, which reads less like calm strategic messaging and more like an attempt to project strength precisely because the underlying military position has become genuinely difficult to defend through conventional means alone. Vice President Mohammad Reza separately described an alleged bunkerbuster strike on a university as, in his own words, a symbol of Trump's madness and ignorance, rhetorically escalatory language that again suggests genuine underlying alarm being. There's one more piece of this story worth including, because it shows how seriously the American side is treating the B-2's long-term role in any future confrontation with Iran, not just this specific war. Speaking at an event called the Board of Peace earlier this year, Trump praised what he called the magnificent B-2 bombers that struck Iran during Operation Midnight Hammer, claiming they had totally decimated Iran's nuclear potential and helped bring peace to the Middle East for the first time in 3,000 years. Separately, CBS News reported that Trump announced the Pentagon is ordering 28 new B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, a platform that's for decades been described as the tip of the spear of America's global strike capability. With that new order coming specifically in the aftermath of its most recent operations against Iran, 28 new bombers represents a massive multi-decade procurement commitment on its own, and the decision to order that many, specifically in the aftermath of this war's actual B-2 operations, tells you the Pentagon views this platform's real-world performance against Iran as strong enough validation to justify a much larger, considerably longer-term investment going forward, well beyond whatever happens next in this specific conflict. Let me give you my honest read on where all of this actually stands, because after walking through everything confirmed and everything still speculative, this deserves a clear bottom line rather than just a pile of competing claims. The B-2's confirmed record in this war is genuinely remarkable, without needing a single exaggeration attached to it. Anywhere the largest B-2 operational strike in American history against Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, executed with a level of secrecy and coordination that even senior officers described as historically unusual, followed months later by a second operation, specifically credited by CENTCOM's own commander with contributing to a 90 collapse in Iran's missile attack capability. Both of those are sourced on the record independently confirmed outcomes that don't require any embellishment to sound significant. What I'd watch for next is straightforward and specific, whether B-2s, specifically not B-1s or any other bomber, actually deploy toward Iran with GBU-57 bunker busters loaded for a genuine strike attempt on Pickaxe Mountain, and whether any resulting satellite imagery afterward shows the kind of confirmed structural damage Fordo displayed after Midnight Hammer, or whether the site's extreme depth proves resistant even to America's single most powerful conventional weapon. That one data point, whenever it actually arrives, will tell you more about the real practical limits of this specific weapons platform than any amount of speculation currently circulating across defense media and social platforms alike.